What's up, my comic comrades? So there's a lot to unpack today, as we're going to be talking about the finale to Geoff Johns and Gary Frank's Doomsday Clock issue 12. Yes, we're aware this issue dropped in December and we're covering it a month and a half after the fact, but that doesn't diminish the importance of this issue for the DC universe going forward. Plus, I'm sure there's a ton of you watching who still haven't read the issue and want to know what the heck happened. Honestly, since issue 12 dropped back in December, there's been a shockingly small amount of attention given to it, especially considering what takes place in the issue and the impact it will look to have on the DC universe going forward. Yes, it took Johns an insane amount of time to get the whole story out, so maybe a lot of fans lost interest, but it's still an awesome story and hugely impactful for characters throughout DC. Regardless, let's dive in, and obviously there's going to be spoilers galore for this series, specifically the ending of Doomsday Clock. So there's your warning. I'll also add that this episode isn't going to be a summary of the entirety of the Doomsday Clock series. We're just going to summarize it briefly and then get into issue 12. But this episode is primarily going to focus on several of the big aspects and most important pieces from issue 12, because there's a lot to unpack in this 54-page giant. And I'll say it again, this changes a lot going forward. This is essentially a crisis event without being a crisis event. Okay, so a little bit of backstory on the Doomsday Clock series. It starts off with the Watchmen world finding out that Adrian Veidt manufactured the alien squid invasion so that the world would unite against the common threat. But when they find this out, the world starts to destroy itself once again. And even though we already knew Dr. Manhattan was responsible for the changes in the DCU and the multiverse in this series, we see him fully admit he's the one responsible for meddling with the DC timelines and changing things within it. He's the one responsible for Flashpoint and the New 52, the one responsible for the original Wally West being written out of existence, and he's why Superman's Earth parents, John and Martha Kent, were killed, and so on and so forth. Dr. Manhattan literally says in Doomsday Clock issue 10, "I have altered the metaverse, and in turn, the multiverse. 1 year ago, the metaverse became aware of my hubris." And we see the original redheaded Wally West say, "Whatever you did, they'll stop you." Dr. Manhattan replies, "I realize the metaverse is not passive. Like an organism fighting to survive, there are aspects of it I've underestimated. I have recreated the metaverse and it has turned against me. I see a vision of Superman in the future. He has found me and he destroys me. Or I destroy the metaverse. I don't know." So Dr. Manhattan is indeed the one responsible for all the chaos and changes going on in the DC universe. But crazier than that, he says he will end up having a confrontation with Superman, but that he can't see what happens in said confrontation. Does Superman kill him? Does Manhattan kill the metaverse? Dr. Manhattan doesn't know, which is insane considering the dude is omnipresent. He can exist in multiple dimensions and in multiple universes at the same time. Now you may be asking, why is Dr. Manhattan even messing with the DC multiverse to begin with? Well, it's an experiment he's doing. He wants to see how strong the metaverse is as compared to his Watchmen universe, which is always on the verge of killing itself, the metaverse being the linchpin to the multiverse. He's essentially hopeless, now thinking every universe is doomed to be its own destruction. Now in the midst of this, Ozymandias couldn't convince Dr. Manhattan to save their world. So Ozymandias came to the DC universe as he knew Superman could convince Dr. Manhattan to save their world. And being the mastermind he is, he set up a confrontation with Superman and Dr. Manhattan that involved setting up an explosion in Moscow with Firestorm killing a bunch of people, then blaming Superman for being there helping Firestorm. In short, he sets up a series of events that lead Superman to Dr. Manhattan. And that, my friends, is my very brief summary to finally start talking about the finale of the series in issue 12. At the beginning of the issue, a bunch of metas, including Black Adam and Posar, start attacking Superman because of his involvement in the Moscow massacre, even though he didn't do anything. While Superman is fighting them off, Dr. Manhattan is saying, "I am caught in a question with two answers. I cannot see through the barrier of blackness. I only see Superman." The battle causes a car to fly towards the helpless mother and son, but Superman is able to catch it in midair last second. Superman then looks at Dr. Manhattan and says, "Whoever you are, help these people." Manhattan says, "I don't help you. I've already seen it." Superman, while still being pummeled by the other metas, tells Manhattan, "I can't do this alone." Manhattan then starts counting down, saying less than 4 minutes now, before this universe is destroyed. Superman, standing up from his knees, bloody and weak, says, "How can you stand there and not do anything?" Manhattan replies, "My world once had a chance at peace, but after I left, it lost it. It fell into war. It's burning, even now. I see nothing but darkness." Essentially, Manhattan thinks no matter what, his world is always going to destroy itself, which is why Adrian couldn't convince him to save it and thinks it's pointless, like putting a band-aid on an open wound. And this is where it starts getting really juicy, friends. Manhattan stands there naked, blue penis and all, telling Superman, I am the one behind the changes in your life. The loss of mentors you've never known, friends you've forgotten. More specifically, I'm responsible for the death of your parents. I changed your life, Superman, out of cold curiosity. Will you destroy me for it? Or will I defend myself despite my sins? Superman's eyes then go red with heat vision as he raises his fist, looking more pissed than ever, ready to charge. Manhattan stands there accepting his fate, and Superman strikes, but then the panel pulls out and we see that he doesn't punch Manhattan, but rather Posar, who was attacking Manhattan. Manhattan says his flame is snuffed out. The darkness is still coming. But I am confused. Why would you defend me? Superman replies, I don't know what to think about all of this, but I do know that right now, you have a choice to make. You talk to me about destroying you, or you destroying me, because all you see beyond this is nothing. But maybe there's a third choice. Who is she? Manhattan says she. Superman says, you're creating those photos with every step you take. I assume that she's important to you. Manhattan replies, she was. Then Superman says, maybe the darkness you see, maybe it takes everything you have to save your world. Maybe you make that choice. Manhattan replies, yes, I understand now. And he raises his hands and stops the battle while saying, everything ends. We then see the next couple of pages in the issue go black, until Manhattan finally says, it begins with a child. The metaverse forms around this one and only sun, as we see baby Superman's rocket land in different times and Earths. We then see Jonathan Kent telling a young Clark, it's too dangerous for you to show yourself to the world. They've never seen anything like you, Clark. If they did, a lot of them would be afraid. Manhattan continues saying, it's July 16th, 1940. I moved the lantern 6 inches out of the engineer Alan Scott's reach. He dies as the train careens off the bridge. He follows that by saying, it's July 16th, 1940. I moved the lantern back, as we see Alan Scott grab the lantern. Then we see the same panel with Jonathan and young Clark again, except this time, Jonathan tells Clark, when I was a boy, my father told me stories of the Just Society of America. Wartime heroes who made us feel safer and inspired us to do our part. But that was decades ago, so if you're telling me you're ready to get out there and show everyone what you could do, well, the world is ready too, Clark. So freaking Dr. Manhattan brought the JSA back. We see how he got rid of them by moving the lantern and then brought them back by giving Alan Scott his lantern again. This is awesome, but let's continue. Clark says thanks, Pa, and gets out of the car to go to his dance. But on his parents' way home, they get T-boned by another car. But before their truck slammed into a tree, Clark is there in his Superboy outfit, saving his parents. His mom gets out and hugs him, saying, you look so handsome. Dr. Manhattan then continues to narrate by saying, inspired by the heroes of the past, Clark Kent stepped into the light. Because the JSA exists again, so does Superboy. And because Superboy exists again, so does the Legion of Superheroes. As the metaverse reforms, time catches up. Dude, it is crazy how Geoff Johns has lined all of this up to give a ripple effect and make each hero and team responsible for the next as it was in real life. I love how much of a continuity junkie and DC purist Geoff Johns is, but it keeps getting better, so let's continue. Manhattan continues to say, the future and the past are free. We then see Superman getting pummeled by Black Adam, Creeper, Manhunter, and a bunch of other metas. But out of nowhere, someone says a little telepathic push will clear them away. Superman looks up saying, who? And a woman replies, you remember us now, don't you, Cal? To which he says, Saturn Girl? Then Jay Garrick Flash shows up saying, sorry we're late, son. And Superman says, well, better late than never, as the JSA and the Legion of Superheroes join him in battle. Superman then leads a charge taking all these metas down, as Manhattan says, I see you tomorrow. The man of tomorrow, and for the first time, I am inspired. It's April 18th, 1938. Metal whines as Superman lifts a 1937 Ford over his head, revealing himself to Metropolis for the first time, which is a freaking homage to Action Comics #1. Manhattan then says, decades later, a police scientist is struck by lightning and the birth of the Speed Force rattles the metaverse. Superman's timeline shifts forward and reality divides for the first time, creating the multiverse. And boom, just like that, the original Earth 2 is born. And then we get the original Crisis, which divides the Earth yet again. Manhattan says, I now understand why these Earths exist. Every time there's a change in the metaverse, the multiverse grows to preserve every era of Superman. More created over the years, including one because of my interference after the flashpoint in this rebirth. Earth 52 is out there. I told you it keeps getting crazier, but the train ride isn't over yet. Manhattan then looks beyond this and he sees year 2020, where Superman's timeline has been bombarded by the reckless energies of the old gods, once again warping the metaverse. Then in the year 2025, a crisis unlike any the metaverse has ever seen, one they will call Time Masters, but in its wake, Superman is revitalized and his greatest allies return. Dr. Manhattan goes on to say no matter how many times Superman's existence is attacked, he will survive, even if change is constant, because hope is the North Star of the metaverse. In January 2026, the timeline is restored and Earth 5G is born, which is very interesting as we've heard the term 5G thrown around a lot for DC over the latter half of 2019. It's been said that this is going to be their next initiative in continuity. So is this foreshadowing? Most likely. I actually feel like a lot of these could be foreshadowing, and if this next one is, I'm extremely excited and intrigued. As Manhattan says, on July 10th, 2030, the secret crisis begins, throwing Superman into a brawl across the universe with Thor himself, and a green behemoth stronger than even Doomsday, who dies protecting Superman from these invaders. First of all, are we getting a DC Marvel crossover again sometime in the next couple of years? Because they full on said Superman fights Thor, but then they also said a green behemoth stronger than even Doomsday died protecting Superman. That's the freaking Hulk. What's happening? I need answers. Dr. Manhattan continues to narrate, giving us several more instances of Superman landing in different times and dimensions before he ultimately says, I now understand Superman's true purpose. He will show them the way. And in a millennium, when his timeline converges with the Legions, humankind will finally embrace the ways of Superman. He is the bridge stretching across generations that will lead everyone to peace. With that, Manhattan knows what he has to do. So he goes back to his world and leaves it with two parting gifts. The first one being he got rid of all nuclear weapons on the planet, which is how the world was going to destroy itself, and has pretty much been the catalyst for all Watchmen stories. The last thing he did is take Mime and Marionette's newborn son and raise him in the same fashion Clark's parents raised him. And at some point, he imbued the boy with his powers. And at the end of the comic, we see he leaves the boy at the Hollis house, aka Night Owl and the Spectre. Their daughter answered the door, and the boy says, I'm sorry to bother you, but a friend of your mom and dad brought me here. He said they know what to do. And the girl goes, my mom and dad are making pancakes. Would you like some? My name is Sally. What's yours? The boy replies, John calls me Clark, as we see the Dr. Manhattan Atom symbol on his forehead. And the comic ends. Now again, there's a lot more to this story and issue. I just gave you the meat of it, but whoa, there's a whole lot to unpack. Now there's a lot of interpretations and things you could take away from this story. One of them, I think, is that Dr. Manhattan realized the reason why his world wasn't getting along was because it didn't have a Superman. He realizes this when talking to Superman, and Superman said, maybe it takes everything you have to save your world. Maybe you make that choice. So in the end, Manhattan chooses hope and sacrifices himself to give his world a Clark/Superman. I've said it before in past videos, Superman is a character, yes, but he's more than that. He's an ideal, he's hope, he's inspiration. And that should be the core of any universe, and that is Superman for the DC universe. And that's why Dr. Manhattan realized that Superman is the core of it all, and no matter how many times continuity gets reset, or how many crises happens, Superman will always be there, the hope and North Star to show them the way. So yes, this story brought back a bunch of things longtime DC fans like me wanted to be restored, like the JSA, the Legion of Superheroes, Superman's parents, and more. But it also served a greater purpose to show that hope and inspiration are and should always be the core of DC Comics. And Geoff Johns is using Superman to make that point. Johns is also pushing the point that Superman started it all for the DC universe, so he's always got to be their backbone. And I couldn't agree more. Batman is my favorite character, but Superman is the backbone of the DC universe. I know a lot of people are going to call this issue just a Superman wank fest and call me a Superman fanboy, and one, really? That's gross. And two, yeah, I love Superman. I know not everyone does, and that's fine. A lot of people say he's too powerful, not relatable, and not relevant. And to that I say, Neil Gaiman said it best about Superman, which I'm going to paraphrase here. He basically said, Superman doesn't have to be relevant or relatable. He just has to be inspiring. Anyway, the end of this series was awesome. Sure, it was plagued with delays and took 2 years to get the full story when we were supposed to get it in 1 year, but I was very satisfied on how it ended. Things are looking good again for the future of DC in my opinion, although I am a little confused. Because this book came out in December and there hasn't been too many ripples across other titles. Like Batman has been very self-contained, Justice League has been kind of doing its own thing with Perpetua, and now the Secret Six, and so on and so forth. Yes, there's been hints of stuff in other titles, but nothing too major in my opinion. Although, that does seem to be on purpose because DC just announced Generation Zero for Free Comic Book Day coming out in May, which is going to be a 32-page one-shot that gives us an epilogue to the Flash Forward miniseries, where the original Wally West takes the Mobius chair before realizing the chair has absorbed the powers of Dr. Manhattan. So things are about to get crazy come summer for DC Comics. Now, I could rant about this series for days because there's still many things I didn't touch on, so I'm probably going to talk about this with Tim on our next podcast because this series was crazy. There are just too many Easter eggs and epic reveals. So if you want a more in-depth conversation on Doomsday Clock, be sure to listen and watch next week's podcast. With that said, let us know what you think of Geoff Johns and Gary Frank's Doomsday Clock story and all the timelines and what have you being restored to the DC Universe. And that's going to bring today's episode to a close. But if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to check out our History of Watchmen episode right here. And if you like our show and our channel, be sure to subscribe and like. It helps us out. But I'll see you guys next time when we talk about all things comics.